Wow, thank you. And it's actually sort of reaffirming to be able to come up and share with you some of the ways I think that, you know, we in the legal system actually try to work day to day to change the experience that you had. And that was actually one of the things I wanted to talk about today. And I also want to just say to all of you guys, I think it's really brave to even sit here and listen. I have 2 teenage boys at home, and I can promise you they're sleeping or watching TV at the moment. But part of the reason why is because they really don't like hearing about all of this. It's scary. We don't really want to have to think about this in our lives. But what can the legal system do, and how can it empower people? And you know, this is something which many of you hopefully won't be victims of violence in your life, and yet I think the experience through your professional lives, you can do a lot to affect change and support people and try to really address what are an epidemic of violence, not just against children, but also against women in our society. You know, we just heard a very powerful story, an individual story about child sex abuse. Let me tell you a story from last year that's empowering about how the law can help a child. We had a 9-year-old in our office who was the victim of child sexual abuse. It was her uncle and her parents. They tried so hard to protect their family. They took every cent they had. They were illegal immigrants, and they paid for private school. And they never used an outside babysitter because they wanted to protect their children from anything like this ever happening to them. And this little girl would go up, and she would be with her uncle, and that's who abused her. And she endured this because her uncle kept saying, "If you don't, your parents are going to get hurt." And she thought she was keeping her parents alive by holding that secret inside and enduring the abuse. Well, finally, the parents did learn this story, and the father, they were illegal immigrants, and the police, that's a frightening thing. They didn't know what could happen to them by reporting the abuse, by trying to prosecute and work with the legal system. They thought they could maybe be deported. And the father worked so hard. He did what we call it a controlled phone call, where he called his brother-in-law on the phone, and he got his brother-in-law over the phone on a taped conversation to admit to some of the abuse. And with that evidence, we were able to prosecute the uncle. And the father came to court, and throughout the time that he's testifying, he's thinking to himself, they're going to know I'm an illegal immigrant. They're going to deport me. I'm going to have to leave my family. But I need to do this. I have to regain my power as a father and my ability to protect my child. And he did. And that was, you know, one of the greatest things that happened for this child was that she was able not only to have her abuser go to jail and for her to feel safe and protected, she was really able to sort of reestablish the boundaries in her relationship where she didn't feel like she was the one who had to protect her parents. So I think day to day, you know, we try so hard in my job at the district attorney's office to make the legal system something that will give people second opportunities. We had a victim come in the other day, and he was homeless when we met him. He collected cans, and he was at his mother's house, and his brother, who was a very violent felon, came home one night and nearly stabbed him to death. And this guy was a really simple guy. He's got limited speech. We could never find him. Trial would come. We're looking on the subways. We don't know how to even, you know, establish a relationship with him practically. But we worked with him, and he found sort of a second home in our office. And eventually, you know, his brother really went to prison for most of the rest of his life. And just the other day, like a year later, he came in and he said to the prosecutor who tried the case, he said, "Hey, lady, it's been a long time." And he gave us all this huge hug, and he wouldn't let go. And he said, I'm working as a UPS worker. And we were like, wow, you know, this is like someone who, you know, connected to the system, connected to society, and a lot because of the support that he got from our office. I guess I see this all on 2 levels. I mean, for me, what I think the people I work with day to day, these stories and these people we connect with, that's what keeps us coming into work. I mean, it's those individual experiences and connections. But I have to say that a big reason that I personally am drawn to this work and why I think it's so important is that I really do believe that violence against women and children is a core social issue. I am driven somewhat by the fact that I think it's a feminist cause, that we in our society can't really, as long as we're going to accept and tolerate this level of violence, we can't expect equality. And, you know, the numbers really are astounding. You know, we just were hearing about the epidemic of child sexual abuse. I mean, I'm not one that's normally drawn into statistics, but when I was thinking about today, I was just looking at 1.3 million women are victims of physical assault by an intimate partner each year. 1 in every 4 women will experience domestic violence. What does that mean about our society? I mean, in my office, we prosecute about 2,800 cases of domestic violence a year. That's in Westchester County. I mean, you all live in New York City probably and not in Westchester County, but people don't think of Westchester County as a place where there's that level of violence. And, you know, you think to yourself, well, what if there were 2,800 cases involving men who were being raped and strangled and hit and assaulted and harassed and called incessantly and stalked? We would think of that as an epidemic. And yet, somehow, we just accept that a certain level of violence against women in our society. So another thing that I think is a really important part of my job, it's not just helping individual victims, empowering individual victims, and prosecuting those cases, but I think it's also to try to rethink like the social systems and how we approach these crimes. So, for instance, one of the things that we've worked really hard in my office to do is create what we call a Family Justice Center. And at the Family Justice Center, we bring together all of the services that can help empower women to be able to leave abusive relationships. Another thing we just try to do is we try to work a lot with youth and focus on healthy relationships and what it means. What is power and control within a relationship? What are the signs of a relationship that's not as equal as it can be? Because we really think that, you know, the change, it's not necessarily about holding an individual person accountable. They should be held accountable for a crime they commit. But the change is really going to come about from having people look at relationships differently. I guess, you know, one last story I would just share with you that kind of, I think, pulls together, you know, the way we can all work to change. The other day, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we were asked, our office, as part of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, to do a presentation at this Con Edison workplace thing. I don't even know who the people were there. They were people from work for Con Edison, I guess. But one of the people who came to speak that I didn't know was going to come to speak was a survivor of domestic violence. And she was sitting there with the director of one of our local shelters. And the shelter director said, "Hey, Audrey, I don't know if you ever met this woman. You actually introduced us to her." And I was like, "Oh, really?" And then this woman told her story. And I was like, "Oh, wow, yeah." This was a woman who, about a couple of years, well, 4 or 5 years ago now, she was in an abusive relationship in a very typical bedroom community. She was a middle-class woman. She had had years of sort of growing abuse in her relationship. It finally led to an assault where she got a black eye. And she called the police. And she finally had come to the point where she decided it was time to leave. So she called the police. The police made an arrest. She got a temporary order of protection. Excuse me. And the judge said to her, if you want to have this order of protection, you need to come to court and testify against your husband. And this was not something that the law requires. And what we did was we said, we want that judge to know that this woman should not be forced to go to court before her trial and confront her abuser. We want this judge to see that this is wrong. So we called all the women's groups. We called the shelter. The shelter came. And the incredible piece of this is that this woman tells a story and she says, I was in court and all of a sudden I look out and there's the shelter director and their lawyer and I felt so safe and I felt so empowered. And from there I went to family court and I got custody and I got a support and I got divorced. And I thought, wow, we're all working together. And that to me was such a great story of how, as lawyers and working with other people in the community, you know, we really can help rebuild people's lives. My time's up, right? Thank you.
Right.